I'm Noel Lateef, President of the Foreign Policy Association, and I am delighted that you all could be here this afternoon. This is not a time slot that we normally do, but we thought we'd make a special exception because we have a very special speaker. Our speaker is Dr. Heather Wilson. She is the Secretary of the Air Force. She has an extraordinary background. She's truly a Renaissance person. She has served in Congress. She was president of a major university. She was an entrepreneur, a Rhodes Scholar. I could go on, but I'm going to keep it at that and turn the floor over to Dr. Heather Wilson.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you, and thank you for doing this at a slightly unusual time, but I'm going back to Washington shortly after this, and so it's a pleasure to be with you. There's, of course, a lot going on in the Air Force at this time, and I'd ask all of you, for those of you who are inclined to prayer, that you keep our airmen at Tyndall Air Force Base in your thoughts and in your prayers this week. Today, our airmen who evacuated in the face of Hurricane Michael are coming back in to recover their household belongings and to see what damage may have been done to their homes at Tyndall Air Force Base, and so I'd ask you to keep them in your thoughts. I wanted to perhaps say a few things about the environment within which we are operating as the United States Air Force and where we're going in the future, and then mostly just open it up to any questions that you may have of me. In the last month, Russia conducted an exercise with 300,000 troops and 1,000 aircraft. It was its largest military exercise in 4 decades. And last year, China commissioned its first aircraft carrier and steamed into the Pacific and started conducting flight operations. And with their bombers located in contested islands in the South China Sea, they're able to threaten and reach all of the countries in that region. The National Defense Strategy, which was published in January of this year, guides us to, and really recognizes the reemergence of great power competition as the defining potential conflict for the next couple of decades. And that defense strategy guides the United States Air Force. We have been engaged in continuous combat operations in the Air Force for 27 straight years. Since Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait in 1990, and the United States Air Force went to the fight and never came home. But that fight is very different from the one that we've been asked to prepare for. And so we have to restore the readiness of the United States Air Force to win any fight, any time, in contested environments against near-peer competitors. So we are building a more ready and more lethal Air Force. You know, we are the best in the world, and our allies and our adversaries know it. But our adversaries are innovating rapidly, including, and in particular, China. The predictable funding that we've had from Congress has helped tremendously. And in an era when partisanship seems to be the rule of the day in Washington, 87 United States senators and a vast majority of both sides of the aisle in the United States House voted in favor of the National Defense Authorization Act and the appropriations, so that we started this year on the 1st of October with a budget and an authorization bill for the first time in over a decade. It gives us an increase in funding, but it also gives us predictability and the kind of stability that will enable us to operate and restore the readiness of the force. So that predictable funding from the Congress has helped tremendously. We are on the path to recovery of the readiness of the force. In 2016, the United States Air Force was short 4,000 maintainers. 4,000 maintainers short. Today, we are 400 maintainers short, and by the end of this year, we will have closed the gap on active duty and for maintainers to 0. So we have to restore, now they're all, of course, now very young maintainers, so we have to season them and make them craftsmen at their work. so that we are able to maintain the aircraft that we have. We are ready for a fight tonight, as the airmen say, but we've still got a long way to go to really prepare for a potential high-end fight. And if we are prepared, that high-end fight becomes less likely. We want to be so strong that anyone around the world who seeks to threaten the interests of the United States of America or our allies would much prefer to work with Secretary of State Pompeo and not with the Department of Defense. The second thing we're about is trying to figure out what is the Air Force of the future going to look like. Chief of Staff Dave Goldfein and I testified in front of Congress last March about our budget, and one of the senators said, you know, you always come up here and testify for the budget and the top line you've been given, and you've built for us the best Air Force you can within that budget number you've given, but you never come tell us what is the Air Force you need. Do you know what is the Air Force you need to execute the National Defense Strategy? We should know that answer. Even if the United States Congress and the people of the United States say, you know, we can't overnight afford that Air Force, given all the other demands on the federal budget, we at least should be able to tell our countrymen what's required to execute the National Defense Strategy. So we have that work underway. We currently, you know, at the beginning of the Gulf War in 1990, we had 401 operational squadrons, 401. Today we have 312. Particularly sequester did terrible damage to the United States Air Force. We lost 30,000 people. We grounded the United States Air Force for 3 months after sequester. So the continental United States was a no-fly zone after sequester. And we lost 1 million hours of maintenance time in our depots. While those days are behind us and we are restoring readiness, we now have just 312 squadrons. When we look forward to where the threat is going in the 2025-2030 time frame, we believe that we will need 386 operational squadrons in order to execute the National Defense Strategy. Now, that is a strategy-driven budget. But we're not naive about what it would take to get there. But I think we have that obligation to be honest about what is required. We are also seeking to change the way in which we equip our force and buying things faster and smarter. Congress gave us some new authorities in 2016 and 2017 to do experimentation and prototyping. In the traditional kind of procurement that the Defense Department does, they spend about 2 or 3 years doing what they call analysis of alternatives, which is all kinds of studies and papers, and you end up at the end of 2 or 3 years and you have a big pile of papers, but you haven't really built anything. And particularly with technically challenging programs, you really don't know what the hard work is until you start to build things. The way with these new authorities we've been given authority to prototype a lot more things. So as an example, we just let 2 contracts to 2 large engine manufacturers to prototype a next generation engine. And we didn't do 2 years of studies. We said, we'd like you to try to build an engine that has a 10% increase in thrust and a 25% increase in fuel efficiency. See what you can do. It's competitive. 2 big companies trying to do this, trying to push the technology forward. But the United States Air Force spends $5 billion a year on fuel. 25% increase in fuel efficiency not only reduces the flying hour cost of our aircraft, but increases the range, reduces our requirements for tankers, changes the planning. And if we can do that, if we can push the technology with Air Force research and development, what can that also mean for the next generation of commercial engines in commercial airliners? So we are trying to buy things faster and smarter, using new authorities for prototyping and experimentation. And it's not just on big projects, it's also on little ones. We have decided that while the Air Force meets all of the goals for small business procurement, over 20% of our purchases come from small business, we want to do even better. and even smaller businesses, because that's where a lot of the real path-breaking innovation is taking place, is in small businesses, even micro businesses and startups, and real innovation. So we're setting out some of our most difficult technical problems and giving small businesses and micro businesses the chance to say, not put together a whole proposal with all kinds of annexes and things that most entrepreneurs can't manage in certain terms of time and money, but a 5-page project proposal. Tell us how you would solve this problem. And if our program managers look at that and think there might be something there, we will invite the CEO of that firm to come make an in-person pitch to the Air Force, and we will pay for their plane ticket to come, which for a lot of small businesses that are just starting up can be a barrier. And then when they make their pitch, if the program manager likes that pitch, they can walk out with a 1-page signed contract and a government credit card swipe on their PayPal account, if they have one, to have a contract with the United States Air Force to develop that idea and that technology. Later this month, we will have our first Small Business Day, and our goal is to sign 50 contracts in 50 hours. And in some ways, you might think that's a little bit gimmicky, but it's to make a point that we're going to do things differently, because we have to. We have a very rapidly innovating adversary, and we no longer completely control the rheostat of time and innovation. If we are going to maintain the preeminence of the United States Air Force in the world, we have to be able to work with America's best innovators and bring those innovations into our national security realm. So we are moving out and fielding tomorrow's Air Force faster and smarter. With that, I would be happy to open this up to any questions you might have of me. Yes?
What do you think of the idea of having a separate branch of the military as space exploration?
The President of the United States has set out a very bold vision for a new Department of Space, and I completely support that. He is intending to put forward in his budget for next year the structure of what a new Department for Space would look like and propose that to the Congress. And the Air Force is involved in trying to shape that piece of legislation and put it forward for the President to transmit to the Congress. We also, as the Air Force right now, have the obligation to, irrespective of what the organizational structure is in the future, to make sure that we can dominate in space as we have done since the 1950s. The United States of America is the best in the world at space, and our adversaries know it. And they're seeking to develop the ability to deny us the use of space in crisis or war, and we cannot allow that to happen. We've done a number of things just over the last several years to develop the capabilities to defend our satellites on orbit and to ensure that they can, take a punch and keep on operating in any kind of crisis or war. And the military in space the Air Force operates 90% of what the military has in space. We have 77 satellites. About half of those are GPS. So the timing signal for the New York Stock Exchange is provided by the United States Air Force. It comes off the GPS satellites. All ATM machines, timing signal. So you can't try to game the system and take money out of your account at 2 places at the same time. The timing signal will keep you from doing that. And the blue dot on your phone, that little voice that tells you, move to the right lane. And the blue dot is the GPS signal run by about 40 airmen in Schriever Air Force Base, Colorado. Average age 22, which is a little scary. They operate GPS for the world. We have about 10 weather satellites. We do a lot of communication satellites, missile warning satellites. So when any missile is launched anywhere in the world, within seconds or minutes, the United States Air Force detects that launch with infrared sensors from space and reports it to Offutt Air Force Base in Nebraska that there has been a missile launch, and then we calculate visually where that is likely to be going. So those are the things we do in space, and we have an obligation to make sure that they continue to be the best in the world and that they're able to operate. And that we do that in a variety of ways. For GPS, for example, we do it. We just signed the next contracts for jam-resistant GPS. So GPS is a very weak radio signal coming off of satellites, and if you can see 3 of them at any one time, it can calculate where you are. But it's a really weak signal. So imagine you've got a teenager in the basement with a really loud stereo, and somebody's whispering. You can jam it pretty easily. So the next generation of GPS satellites will be 8 times as resistant to jamming as the current ones we have. Just as an example for how do we protect our ability to operate in space. Yes?
How concerned are you by Turkey's purchase of S-400 air-to-surface-to-air missiles from the Russians? You mentioned the joint exercises. So the Turks are doing joint exercises with the Russians, Chinese, Iranians at one point. They're the second largest army in NATO. Are you concerned about intelligence sharing?
I wouldn't say that we're concerned about it. Turkey is one of our allies in NATO, and we have a number of conversations ongoing with them about the military equipment that they might buy and how that would cause us to be to have to change the way in which we train and operate with our ally Turkey. And I think they're aware of our concerns, and I think our governments are seeking to work those things out. Yes, sir.
Yes, we've spoken about technology, of course. This is the foremost topic these days. But I was curious as to your views on artificial intelligence and drones and where they are in the Air Force of the future.
Yes. At the start of the Gulf War, we only had 8 unmanned aerial vehicles, 8 remotely piloted aircraft. Today, we have over 260. So the Air Force operates remotely piloted aircraft all over the world, but they are remotely piloted. They are not run by artificial intelligence. I do think that, we are using artificial intelligence for things that are better for machines to do than humans to do. For example, looking at video screens and full motion video for a long period of time. That's something that's better done by machines than by humans, where the machine would tip the human to what to look at. So we are looking at artificial intelligence in those kinds of ways. I would say that it is important to always, when the decision to use force is made, the United States brings its values to the fight. And it is important for those values and a human decision to be made about when to use force in any conflict. Yes, ma'am.
This is a very basic question. I hope you don't mind. What is the difference in the mandate of the Air Force as compared to the Navy and the Army with their planes? And how do you coordinate in the case of a war?
That's actually a really good question, and it was something that was resolved really, it's ongoing resolution in any conflict, but at the beginning of the Air Force, what would be the responsibility of the Air Force compared to the Navy and the Army? The Army has a lot of helicopters as well as some light aircraft, and the Navy, of course, has aircraft carriers to be able to project power forward. Let's take all of us as services organize, train, and equip forces, and then we present those forces to a combatant commander that integrates them into the fight. So Dave Goldfein, the Chief of Staff of the Air Force right now, at one time was the head airman in Central Command at Al Udeid, fighting in Afghanistan and Iraq. There is a single air tasking order every day, and it not only includes Army, Navy, and Air Force, it includes 28 allied countries as well on a single air tasking order. So that is how we conduct joint and coalition operations under a single combatant commander. It changed and became that way after a terrible, military disaster and mishap, really. After, and many of you probably remember this, it was in 1980, 81, must have been. I may be wrong on the dates, but it was the failed hostage rescue attempt. So it would have been 79 was the takeover of the embassy. I'm blanking on the dates, but it was the failed hostage rescue attempt where we brought people together, but only at the line of scrimmage. And they had not really trained together as a joint force. And that really resulted in changes in 1984-ish to the way in which we organize our forces and train in a joint way.
But what is the mandate of the Air Force as compared to the other two?
Well, we organize, train, and equip air forces for the conduct of prompt and sustained combat operations in the air. Our mission is we provide global strike, we provide the nuclear deterrent, we provide global mobility, global power, tactical air. So those missions are ones that are Air Force missions. Yes, sir.
Civilian aviation is running through a demographic crunch with respect to pilots being forced to retire, not enough new pilots coming in, and including engineers to service cutting-edge aircraft. How does that apply to the U.S. Air Force? What are your plans for recruitment and retention?
Yeah, great question. So there is a national shortage of aviators, of pilots, and the commercial airline industry hired about 4,500 pilots last year. And they are projected to hire that many or more for the next decade, and we have a shortage of aviators. Part of it, it's not just that we aren't inspiring young people to join aviation, it's the pathway to get there is a lot more expensive than it used to be because of some of the rules and the numbers of hours you have to be able to even to sign on with a regional airline. We had recently a summit with the Air Force Department of Labor and the FAA and the aviation industry about how can we open up more pathways to aviation for the nation. For the Air Force, we are short about 2,000 pilots. We have a plan to get well by both increasing retention, making the Air Force, improving the quality of service and the quality of life for airmen who are aircrew, and also increasing the number of pilots we're training. We trained about 1,100 pilots last year. We're ramping up over a period of a couple of years to train 1,500 pilots a year. So we will increase training and also try to increase retention. Our models show that if we continue on this path, that we will recover the pilot shortage in 2023. Yes, sir.
Regarding the Space Force, you seem to be comfortable with it. What do you see as the interface and mission between the Air Force and the Space Force? For example, would the Air Force continue to use the ICBM? Would that be a part of the Air Force mission? Also, the anti-ICBM work that's going on. And just how do you see that division between the Air Force and the Space Force?
Of course, all of this is currently being worked out in a proposal that the President will put forward to the Congress. So it's not going to be my decision, but we're one of the entities that's trying to work on this. I don't think there's anyone who intends to move the nuclear deterrent into a Space Force. People are talking about actual, what the equipment that we operate in space, and so that's really the focus. Yes, sir.
The new Michael Lewis book, The Fifth Risks, includes a lengthy interview with Catherine Sullivan, the first female astronaut, and her role as chief scientist and in the Department of Commerce. He makes statements which I'd like you to comment on. He speaks about the way Mr. Trump administration is downplaying the role of science in the operation of the various government departments, and more recently, closing down access to the weather information by the general public because the head of AccuWeather, who sells weather information, has persuaded him to say you've got to buy it to get it. Do you think that Lewis is exaggerating the actions taken by the Trump administration in these areas?
I haven't read the book. I actually like Michael Lewis's book, so I'll probably go find that one. But
it's alarming in the statements that it makes, and I'm curious to know if anyone else has an opinion about the credibility of what he says.
I haven't read that book of Michael Lewis's, although I have read some of his others. The United States Air Force does provide weather information, primarily for military operations, but we collaborate with NOAA and others, and we do a lot of research on weather and weather forecasting and atmospheric science, and so we haven't changed any of our. In fact, I'm a big advocate for increasing Air Force research and development, science and technology, because we're so dependent on it long term. It's the seed corn.
We have time for one more question.
Yes, sir.
Secretary Wilson, could you describe a little bit how you see the cyber threat from principally the Russians and the Chinese against the Air Force, and how we're positioned to combat those threats.
Yeah, the air. First of all, the threat is the threats from various levels, various different countries, and also individuals and criminal networks and other kinds of things. I think it's not just the military that's facing it; it's industry that's facing it, and certainly finance as well. The United States Air Force provides 39 cyber mission teams, which are trained cyber warriors, and we provide those to Cyber Command. We also have the responsibility to try to protect our Air Force capabilities from potential cyber attack. And one of the things that we're doing is we have about 1,700 people who are trained in cyber, but not all of them are working on high-end cyber. So some of them are like working at the help desk when my email fails, and that's not a good use of their talents. So we are shifting to enterprise IT as a service, so we will contract with companies to provide the internet and email and those kind of things, and then that'll allow us to use our 1,700 cyber-trained professionals to actually be cyber mission teams and seek to protect the base and our weapons systems. I think one of the other things that we need to recognize is that the supply network and the supply chain of suppliers in American industry is vulnerable. And working in partnership with American industry to reduce the cyber threat and the loss of information is also a big part of our national security. Thank you very much.
Thank you.